My guest today is Thomas Parker, the co-founder of the Agile Learning Centers education model, ALC, that launched more than a decade ago. Since 2014, Thomas has led business operations at ALC Mosaic in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he recently founded a new project called Prism, which is a web application designed to make it easier to document and communicate the value of emergent self-directed learning in microschools, homeschool programs, and for homeschooling and unschooling families. Thomas Parker, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Hi, Kerry. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. You and I met and worked together years ago through the Alliance for Self-Directed Education. We recently connected again at the National Hybrid Schools Conference in Atlanta. It's so great to see the rising popularity of microschools and homeschool learning centers in recent years, and particularly exciting to see mounting interest in self-directed education and the ALC educational model. In fact, one of our new entrepreneurs in residence at the Foundation for Economic Education is Jenny Jones, who runs the Treehouse ALC in Utah. She's been publishing some wonderful articles for us on her journey as an ALC microschool founder. And you were really a pioneer in the innovative education space, beginning with your days working at the Manhattan Free School roughly 15 years ago. You also worked for a time before that in a Montessori school. So tell us what those early days in alternative education were like for you.
Yeah, it's been quite a while now. It's just, which is strange, but yeah. I mean, for me, my journey really started with I think sort of getting red pilled by the book Summerhill. um, I read that book in college while I was finishing up a psych degree. I was a big fan of Eric Fromm, the social psychologist who wrote the foreword for that book. That was the version that was published in the U.S. The foreword's great, by the way. And yeah, it's interesting because like my whole like the work is officially and technically in education, but for me, like I didn't like school growing up. I had a formative experience being homeschooled for a year and a half that kind of helped me see the inefficiencies of conventional schooling. And then when I was really searching for like what am I going to do after school, I knew I wanted to be done after getting a bachelor's degree. Um, I had entrepreneurial kind of mindset, spirit, but I also wanted to do like meaningful social change work. And that book just really helped me see this idea that I just became very interested in the idea of what it looks like if we trust children rather than trying to train them, essentially is how I put it. And so, I think for me, it just became about trying to put myself in environments where people had that same mindset and we're coming from that same place. And so that meant, you know, a foot in the no, doing teacher's assistant thing at a Montessori school, and then realizing, okay, this isn't really the full expression of it for me. And then moving to New York just to be around the Brooklyn Free School was there at the time, and the Manhattan Free School had just started, and just kind of, you know, persistently finding my way into an opportunity to work there part time, be around that, and that was really like what I would say, like as an alternative to grad school for me, were those years at the free school. Just it was highly experimental, but that's what I was kind of after was just like what happens if we just kind of remove the whole notion of like schooling and start with the idea that like human beings are born, as you know from our work with the Alliance and kind of what we were trying to formulate, the ideas around that, the term self-directed education, like born with the innate ability to learn, curiosity, and to learn from their surroundings, and with their own like unique innate wisdom. I think like I had this experience just feeling like the adults around you are always like kind of holding this veiled layer of like, you know, we have all the answers, and if you just kind of do what we say and check the boxes and follow the rules and please the adults, one day you can be, like us, and you'll understand how the world works, and everything will be fine, and you'll be well adjusted. And then the older you get, you realize, like, oh wow, that's actually the case at all. The adults don't really have any idea what's going on. There's a lot of problems in the world, and they're still trying to figure it out. It's been very, yeah, yeah. So I just really became committed to this idea of creating spaces where adults had relationships with kids that were truly collaborative, truly about not neglecting or disregarding the innate power we have adults or the wisdom or the experience, but relationships with kids that are about, collaboration and learning together. And so for me, the whole like, academic learning part is like just a very, very small sliver of that story, but that in our society, because conventional schooling is such a big part of how we raise kids, that becomes the context and the vehicle, bring these other ideas. And so for me, my journey has really been about like slowly learning how to create spaces that are palatable enough for enough people, because of what we, want to think about school and learning is, where they can also start embracing and feeling comfortable with this idea of not knowing and trusting their kids that they actually have the wisdom they need to figure out how to spend their time effectively and what's important to them, and the space to really cultivate who they are as people, their own values, so they don't have to do that work when they're 35 or 40, hiring a life coach to kind of, figure out who they are for the first time. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of the big picture. I mean, the early days were the early days were highly experimental. They still
Yeah.
are.
Yeah, right. So I love that Summerhill, the book by A.S. Neal, was sort of your gateway into thinking about alternative education and what, learning could look like in a more self-directed way. Of course, Summerhill was published in 1960. It sold more than 2 million copies in its first decade in print, was hugely popular, and was based on sort of the story of A.S. Neal creating the Summerhill School in England in 1921 that remains today and was really one of the first schools to embrace the idea of sort of self-directed education and autonomy for young people. That's inspired entrepreneurs now for decades, including you. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, being at the Manhattan Free School and then what led from there to this idea of Agile Learning Centers and being part of that founding team.
Yeah. Well, I think that the tricky thing is like when you do start sort of from a blank slate, you have to then generate something that's coherent. You have to generate a container. You have to kind of create, this is what it is, this is what it isn't, this is what we do, this is what we don't do. And so I think, my experience at the Manhattan Free School is a bunch of really great people with similar values and passions and desires, as me, but it just didn't quite find the coherence that it needed to sustain itself. And so I think, I had different challenges personally with some of the ways, like the democratic school movement, history, like as you know, in Sudbury Valley and all that, like there's this kind of infrastructure of like a political democracy for kind of creating the coherence of the school. And I thought that there was just, yeah, an opportunity to kind of reimagine some aspects of like what a self-directed learning community could look like, and some of the tools and practices for that. And I met a parent at the school at the time who had, previously done some things in alternative education and was in software. And Arthur Brock was his name. It was actually, his initial kind of idea, the term Agile Learning Center. So we had this opportunity when it looked like the school was going to abruptly close to kind of keep it open and try some of these new ideas, these new patterns, which is really just about bringing like more modern thinking into the space around iteration, intention setting, reflection, learning through feedback loops. This idea of like culture hacking, looking at what are the kind of implicit agreements that we have about how we are and what we do and value, make them explicit so that we can actually agree to try new things and change things together.
And
And
this
so,
was, not to interrupt, Thomas, but this
yeah,
was also because at the time, agile software tools were really informing the software development space with these ideas of sort of iteration and collaboration. Is that right? That there was sort of a movement afoot in software development that kind of informed the ALC educational model?
yeah, for sure. In software development and in just like change management, business like practices in general, I think you were seeing more innovation in business practices and people realizing like, oh, like if there's like the Google 80/20 thing, like if you give people time and space to like do what they want and their creativity, they might actually come up with the next big innovation. And if you co-locate and like make things more transparent and collaborate instead of silo, you're going to move faster together. And if you have a direct communication with your customer and iterate, like so these are the kind of patterns that were informative there. And I did a lot of writing about that in the early years about like the kind of parallels between waterfall software approach, which is kind of the old school way, and our conventional school system, and what an agile education would be. Where in waterfall you're kind of coming up with the big project requirements and trying to guess at like what you're going to need to build the software, what the features are that are going to make it work for the customer. And then it takes you 2 years, and then by then there's new coding language, and it's the business that they have is completely changed, and what you built doesn't make sense anymore. And we're kind of been doing that in education for a long time. So agile is really, it's more of a mindset than it is a specific tool or anything. It's this, idea that the world's changing, and the wisdom is inside of us, and the answers are within the room and within the context of the people you're working with. And so it's all about this kind of emergent process that's led by curiosity and humility and collaboration. Um, so yeah, that created the opportunity to try some new ideas. And that's Arthur was a mentor to me in the early years, and kind of gave me the confidence to step in and run the school then. Um, and so, yeah, I directed this school in New York for 2 or 3 years. But the first year I met my wife, my now wife, a few months into the school having started. She had just opened the Mosaic School in Charlotte, and she kind of was she was a public, and like, I'm going to do my own thing. And so she had connected with Arrow, the Alternative Education Resource Organization, gone to IDEC, and met a bunch of people that knew me. And then they told her to come visit me and see what we were doing in New York. And so, yeah, it wound up being a pretty quickly formed partnership in that, she's kind of the child whisperer. She's kind of the just, magnetic around children, and got to this work through teaching, but really serve kids, who they are and where they're at. I learned in the early years that you know, I like children, I like being around them, but too much of it drains me, and my real contributions are kind of where there was a deficiency in the education space, which is like the entrepreneurship, the operations, the kind of making the train stay on the track. So yeah, so I worked between the New York school ALC Mosaic, which became ALC Mosaic. Yeah, and then a
Yeah.
lot just kind of snowballed from there, I guess you could say.
Yeah, so I want to talk more about the snowballing, but you officially launched ALC as a network in 2013. Then you began leading business operations at ALC Mosaic in North Carolina in 2014. And then, yeah, ALC took off and continues to be popular. Tell us a little bit about the ways in which founders are using ALC to establish different types of learning communities.
Yeah, I think it's a bit different now than it was. I mean, from my vantage point, there's kind of like the first 5 years, and then the pandemic, and then and then since then,
Yeah, so
um,
tell us maybe about those, the before, then during COVID, and then after. Take us through those time periods with ALC.
yeah. Well, I mean, in the beginning, we were all younger. There's a lot of passion. We didn't have children, and so and ALC was kind of born out of my experience at a social change incubator that Arthur Brock and his partner were running called Emerging Leader Labs. This was in the summer of 2013, and so that was like an 8 week residential live in upstate New York with other people and focus on kind of the cultural DNA of what you're doing first. And so my experience there heavily informed, some of the first years of the facilitator trainings we would do. So 2014 through 2019, we hosted these what we called ALF Summer, Agile Learning Center Facilitator Summer. It was sort of like a, hippie summer camp for radical educators that wanted to start micro schools that trusted kids. So we would spend sometimes three, I think one year it was even 4 weeks. We'd bring people together and we'd, find housing for everyone. We would meet every day. We would embody kind of the practices of an Agile Learning Center together. And then we would run a summer camp for 50 kids or something like that, for 1 or 2 of those weeks. And that, we made no money doing that. It was not like an intention to do a business. It was just to support and seed these ideas. And yeah, a lot of Agile Learning Center programs still exist today have founders from those trainings. Yeah, we had a child in 2017, and then I think we did a big training in 2019, and then I was planning a retreat for the ALC network and kind of sort of like be like, okay, we got all these things going on around the world. Let's recohere this again. And then the pandemic happened, and then yeah, and then a lot. I think through the pandemic was like a lot to just kind of keep our community stable and thriving, and so. I also didn't want to really kind of be the guy all the time for the project and wanted, it to kind of just take on a bit of a life of its own. So yeah, I mean, there's people that were deeply influenced, friends of ours that are off doing other projects in the space now that have been through our trainings, that are running their own trainings and their own, doing their own kind of outreach and programs and podcasts and whatnot. And then there's people who like Jenny, who you mentioned, who I didn't even know until a couple weeks ago, just find our material, resonate with it, sign up for our $100 a year membership, join our Slack group, read our starter kit, and they're off and running. And then I see them on Instagram at some point and realize that they exist. So,
Yeah, I love that.
it's kind of yeah, it's very organic and grassroots, and it's kind of taken on a bit of a life of its own at this point.
Yeah, and well done to you and your wife Nancy, that you're at this position now where ALC is becoming such a sought after learning model for both founders and families, to the point that it's so decentralized, you're often not aware of all the people who are even using the tool. And that just must feel really gratifying to know that you could have sort of unleashed something into the world that's having such a positive impact. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you think is attracting more founders and families, not only to ALC specifically in that educational model and network, but alternative education and self-directed education more broadly?
Yeah, I think, I think generally get into education because they have good hearts and because they love supporting kids, they care about kids, they want to do positive work. And I think people that have been in conventional schools as teachers for a long time, you can kind of tell some of them struggle to kind of maintain their light as educators. But I think that with more and more opportunities, whether through this kind of school choice movement and the micro school movement, sort of happening in tandem with that, I just think it gives people more of an opportunity to follow their intuition, to do what my wife did as a teacher who wanted more space and autonomy, and authenticity, and to do what I did, just thinking about it from like a social kind of entrepreneurship perspective. It just gives people the opportunity to trust themselves, which is what you need, because that's what I want adults to be doing for kids. And there's the whole kind of John Holt quote that everyone loves of like, we don't know how to trust kids because we weren't trusted ourselves. So I think that there's sort of this thread that's unraveling for educators and parents too, um, of trusting themselves a bit more, to have more agency over what kind of educational experiences they're creating for kids. Um, yeah, and people come, and sort of like homeschooling, I think in the micro school space, people are coming and it's like, well, all they really intellectually know is conventional school, but in their intuition and in their heart, they know there's something well below that, surface level in terms of the depth and the kind of expansiveness of what it could look like. And so they try something that looks like conventional school, and then they see like, oh, I have more time and space to really understand these kids, or if it's homeschooling your own kids, and then you see like, oh wow, they're actually learning a lot just from kind of doing this thing they really like, and then you slowly start to, it's kind of the quintessential homeschooler journey. I think it's probably also happening for micro school founders as well. Some of the folks that I spoke with, at the conference last week, um, kind of starting to have that experience. So yeah, I think just being able to kind of show people like, yeah, like these ideas have existed for a long time. I wasn't the first person. I stood on the shoulders of many people, and those people stood on the shoulders of many people. And in reality, this is just like, the way people educated their kids forever before conventional schooling, was invented. So it's sort of getting back to an old way. But trying to recontextualize it to the world we live in now.
Yeah, and of course, you and I were collaborating on this work before COVID, and I think we both felt sort of mounting interest in alternative education and self-directed education. Homeschooling before COVID was growing in popularity, and the homeschooling population was becoming more diversified even before COVID. And then, of course, COVID hit, and it seems like the momentum is just beginning in many ways. I feel like we're just at the beginning of this movement that, of course, you and I were involved with before that. How important do you think the sort of COVID disruption was, and sort of the fallout from the pandemic in accelerating this trend? Because I often think, I think we would have continued to see growth. I think we would have continued to see mounting interest in these models, but it would have been slower and nothing like what we're seeing now. And I'm curious if you agree with that, or what you think the impact of COVID and its aftermath were.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't. Maybe you would know this better, but like, how many of the states with the really, you know, expansive and free, a lot, flexible school choice ESA, policies were sort of already on that path before the pandemic, versus how many do we think are sort of coming along because of what happened there? I think that that's a huge part of it, just in terms of like, you give one or a few states the opportunity to really just say like, you can open up a school, or you can homeschool, or you can do it. You have the funds, and do you make it accessible? You're going to see a lot of opportunities for people to try new things and to trust their intuition, which is what I would support. I think for the pandemic, it was. I mean, we that's kind of where like we were like, okay, we had people in our community. And one thing I love about self-directed education is we have people in our community who were on very different ends of the spectrum of like, this is a hoax, and I'm never wearing a mask to two masks, you're harming people, and everywhere in between. And so trying to figure out how to navigate and support everyone in the community took a lot of energy. So I don't have that great of like, that was a very like, at a toddler, I was very like a insular time for me. But I can imagine that for a lot of people it was sort of lifting the veil of, you send your kids to school all day and you think they're doing like interesting and productive and useful things with their time, really got a window into sort of what I experienced as a first and second grader that was homeschooled for a year and a half, which was like, oh, you can wake up at 10 and do academic work for 90 minutes and then play all day and then go back to school a year later and be like ahead of people somehow. So that, I think that's where, that's kind of what's actually happening there kind of light bulb that happened for a lot of parents and a lot of people in general. And what's your take on that? I don't know how
Yeah,
accelerated the pandemic.
I completely agree. I think parents were put back in the driver's seat. They were able to, as you say, get a window into what was happening in their kids' schools. And they looked around because their local schools were often closed and said, what else is there? And then they
Yeah,
discovered this whole world of homeschooling or, pandemic pods and kind of these
yeah,
spontaneous learning communities that were emerging. And I think it just really inspired many parents and many teachers to look at some, different opportunities. You mentioned the growth of education choice programs. Of course, since the pandemic, there's now 16 states that have universal school choice programs enabling all K-12 students to have access to education funding. To use at the education environment that they choose. In North Carolina, one of those 16 states with universal school choice programs. Could you talk a little bit about how and if ALC Mosaic is taking advantage of that program, how you see programs like that being able to benefit from school choice programs?
yeah. Yeah, it's been huge for us. You know, in one way, I'd say if I was going to do it all over again, we probably would start something that wasn't a legal school and was more of like everyone was homeschooled, because I think it kind of has this the medium as the message would be a little bit more accurate there, in terms of like, it's every family is responsible for their kids' education, and we are a thing that you can participate in rather than being like responsible for. But in North Carolina, it's almost, we benefited from the fact that we have been a legal private school this whole time, because that's how the school
Yeah.
choice program really works here.
For now,
And
hopefully that will change.
yeah, that's true. Universal ESAs that don't require an IEP would be nice. For sure, that would open up a lot of new possibilities. But yeah, I mean, I think, part of the challenge I think people with like on the left or liberal social values have around education reform is it's very wrapped up in this idea of equity and access, and even like social services for children that need a roof and food every day, and those are important things to, I think, to untangle. But my larger point being, we've shared similar values. We want the schools that we create, the programs that we create, to be accessible. It's never been like exciting to me to create something that is only for upper middle class or upper class families. I think it's a disservice to those kids, and then it's also just not reaching all of society. And so we've focused on being very accessible. I mean, it sounds crazy to say, but from the entire time ALC Mosaic existed in Charlotte, we had many families that paid our lowest tuition tier of $1,200 a year out of pocket. And we would just try to get to an average of like 6,000 per student by having other families pay $12,000 a year. And this was, in the past, the tuition numbers have changed since then. But with, about 3 years ago, we were at a point where something had to give because it was like, me, my wife, other directors, other partners we've had in the school, getting older, having children. It's like I don't know if we can live off of this amount of money for the rest of our lives, and having a hard time attracting and retaining good staff. And then the school choice program became universal, and so it's been a game changer for us in that we have a lot more staff than we had before, and which makes the whole experience feel more sustainable. And we are even able to lower our out-of-pocket tuition further, which so we have about 80 students, and I would say nearly half of them, the families pay $800 a year out of pocket, $80 a month for 10 months, and get $7,600 roughly in scholarship monies. And then we have other families that pay $16,000 out of pocket. So, and everywhere in between. And so that's just been a value of ours is like, it's not it's something I have complicated feelings about in terms of how some of the you know VC funding has come into education and whatnot. It's like making education a commodity is it's tricky. So I do think school choice programs are a really important solution to that, so that they can truly be accessible. I think one of the critiques of the program in New York and sometimes across and other places is that you know is $7,600 enough to attend a private school in Charlotte, North Carolina? Like, not like parochial schools, maybe. Most of the private schools here would be completely unaffordable, even with that. And so, I just implore people who maybe share similar values about equity and access, but also want to create places where kids are free and autonomous and trusted. That like you can create those places in these environments now and make them completely accessible, as long as you're transparent about what you're doing and what you're kind of asking of all the families across the spectrum. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's been extremely important for us.
And I think one really interesting thing is that a lot of these emerging educational models, micro schools, learning pods, homeschool resource centers, that sort of thing, they tend to be lower cost anyway, certainly much lower cost than traditional private schools. And in many cases, they're right in that sort of price point of these education savings account programs and school choice policies, also sort of showing that education can be more affordable and that affordability can be increased through school choice programs. So, what is ALC Mosaic like now? You're serving what ages and how many students and how many staff? Sounds like you've been able to expand your staff.
Working on the payroll earlier this morning, and yes, just as you asked that question. So we've been we're somewhere, yeah, right around 80 students. We are serving ages 5 to high school through 18 officially.
Great.
We have a lot in the 5 to 8 range and a lot in the 10 to 13 range. And yeah, our we don't have the same like exact structures as we did 10 years ago, and that's on purpose. Like that's how the whole ALC thing's supposed to work in my mind. A lot of people kind of got, you know, thought it was like, oh, it means that kids use a Kanban board or something. It's like, well, no, it means that you like make things visible and then iterate. So that's
Mm.
just a tool for that. So we've changed like sort of structures and patterns and processes based on what we've learned over the years, based on who we're serving, based on kind of how we've, you know, figured out what kind of place we can be that's effective in Charlotte, Carolina. But yeah, I mean, do you mean like what does it look like in terms of the education model, or I mean, I can,
No, you've answered all of that. Would love to know also now, you said roughly 80 students,
yeah.
basically K to 12, and then how many staff roughly?
Oh gosh, well, we have a lot of part-time staff, so
Yeah.
what we do is really just like um, I think we have 6 full-time staff, and then we have. I mean, I think I was paying 24 people this morning, so
Yeah,
so
great.
we've added we have a couple tutors that work with kids who we've identified as having dyslexia that are asking to learn to read and having trouble with that.
Hmm.
We have current students that are actually part-time junior facilitators. We have former students that are coming back from college and working for us. We have two folks that do art, art stuff in the art room. So we kind of go out and it's like we were um, going to do like a theater program. We found a woman that's kind of running supporting a play. So yeah, it's a little tricky. I talk to the staff about this a lot. Like in my position as like the business operations person, it's like I would have 3 years ago would have been like, oh my God, we're averaging $10,000 a student. This is we'll
Mm.
have so much extra money, but you can always find new people, resources like, supporting kids and their interests and it just gives you the opportunity to do more things, more one-on-one time, more small group, more
Yeah,
experiences. So
so great.
it's working.
Oh, it's working, and it sounds like it's now even more sustainable, thanks to the education choice programs, both from your perspective as founders and educators, but also, financially accessible for more families, which is exciting.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
would love to turn now to your latest entrepreneurial endeavor, which is Prism. So, tell us a little bit about where this idea came from and what Prism promises to do.
Well, I don't know if I'm making any promises yet, but we'll see. I appreciate the I should make confident, bold claims. Yeah, so this came from, in the past 5 years, I've my role with the school is sort of part-time-ish. I've always had some other projects. I've worked on some tech projects, um, and kind of discovered this past fall that like I had enough technical knowledge and AI had kind of advanced far enough that I felt like, oh, I could actually build an application. This it, people like to call it vibe coding these days. So kind of taking the taking talking to AI and getting it to write code for me and figuring out if it's good or not and iterating it from there. So I I basically wanted to solve some really tactical pain points that we've had at ALC Mosaic for over a decade when it comes to documentation and building portfolios for kids. So the whole like sharing the value of your learning has been a part of the ALC conversation from the beginning. In the beginning, we did like we all blogged together every Friday. Like we asked the kids to write blogs about what they did, and that worked for some kids, but not other kids. And then it kind of fell away. And so I've had like about 12 years of just kind of witnessing what people naturally do, especially like what facilitators and then some kids are naturally doing to sort of communicate or share what's happening in the space. And for us, it's like a lot of it's pictures. It's like people take pictures. Homeschoolers probably know this. Like, so we have all these pictures, and they just we weren't doing a whole lot of valuable things with them, other than make a yearbook at the end of the year, which was also a tedious process. So Prism came from just me wanting to solve some really like frustrating pain points. Like, you know, could we take a picture of 4 or 5 kids doing something and tag all of those kids and say something about what's happening and have it go to a portfolio for all of those kids in one step? Because otherwise, everything else, we're always using some sort of mangled tool set. We tried Class Dojo, Bloom, Seesaw, all these other apps over the years that just didn't quite understand our user experience, and so yeah, other things like, we want to have parents be able to add to a portfolio and the facilitators because learning happens everywhere. And sometimes you might go on a trip for 2 weeks, or, a lot of these programs are 3-day-a-week homeschool programs, and the kids are at home and in a community. That's a growing pattern right now. So we also wanted it to like, you could join our space and we can add to the portfolio, but then if you leave you get to retain that content yourself, because we've had this other issue of like creating a bunch of documentation for kids for a few years and then they leave, and then it's like, oh sorry, like we have all these pictures and all these narratives and all this stuff, but it's kind of like stuck in our instance of whatever platform we were using. So that's kind of where it started. I kind of, went on a deep dive for 2.5 months and built this thing and stood it up and we started using it. And then as I was doing that, I was talking to more people, more ALCs, more self-directed learning communities and hearing like, oh, we just share photos in Slack or we just have this big, Google photo album or like everyone's telling me pretty much the same story, which is we're using stuff for this that wasn't designed for this. And so I started realizing like there's a there. And then as I just kind of thought about the problem more, it's these kind of tactical problems of like what it looks like to document and share the value of what's happening in your micro school or whatever on a day-to-day basis. But then there's this larger problem I see of like, communicating the value of self-directed education, self-directed learning to, you know, either your own parents if you're a micro school or to a college later or to the rest of the world. And so some of the stuff I'm planning with the app now is like using some AI to kind of quickly uncover what the educational content, interests, and skills are in any emergent learning, moment that you're capturing, and being able to kind of make structured data out of these unstructured moments, so that you can start building up a database and a profile for kids on all the different content that they are doing without starting with a curriculum. You start with what they're interested in, and then you make visible and record all the stuff that's actually happening in that emergent process, which is something we've talked about, in the whole, in our space, like, the basics are embedded. Like when you do baking, you're learning fractions and chemistry and all this stuff, but like it's kind of tedious to document all that all the time. Um, so yeah, for me, the larger goal is like I want to build a tool that makes people feel more confident about choosing trust-based pedagogies and letting kids lead the process and letting the learning come from an a kind of push system, and then to be able to easily communicate to anyone the richness of what's happening when you do that, because I see it all around me in our space, and I don't think people realize like this is what a lot of progressive educators are trying to kind of create, kind of in reverse, is like, well, if we could just come up with something that's so engaging and the kids will do this project and it'll be like, interdisciplinary. It'll be like, all these different, kind of edu terms. But if you just let kids play and learn and explore things on their own and present invitations to things, all that stuff happens anyway.
Yeah,
So yeah, I just want to,
amazing.
I want to help validate that experience for
Yeah.
people.
Sounds like such a great tool, much needed. So where are you now in the development process? Is this a tool already that unschooling families and learning communities, ALC, others can already tap into, or how soon can they take advantage of this amazing product?
Yeah, well, it's yeah, it's in a bit like I would say private beta right now. I have 9 or 10 different communities that are actually already actively using it, which is pretty telling for me because like it's kind of a pain to jump into something in the middle or end of the year, and a bunch of people have already wanted to do that, and a bunch of other communities are telling me they're planning to start using it this summer, for next year. So yeah, I mean, the website is prism.guide, and people can reach out to me at Thomas or try at prism.guide. I'm wanting to kind of have direct communication with folks that are using it right now, but I'm hoping by August or September that won't necessarily need to be the case, and it'll kind of be out of this particular stage. So I'm trying to get, development ramp back up right now, starting a relationship with some developers, looking for kind of like a deeper technical co-founder long term, because my version that I vibe coded is stable and works and solves some problems, but to kind of take it to the next level and really have it do a lot of things I want it to do, I'm looking for technical partnership long term. So yeah, it's rolling forward, and we'll see.
Terrific. And so again, the website is prism.guide and Agile Learning Centers, Agile Learning Communities. If folks want to learn more about that educational model or start their own ALC, that's agilelearningcenters.org. So as we wrap up, Thomas, love to get your final advice for new founders or future founders who are looking to launch a new micro school, a new learning center, a new ALC community, all of these innovative education spaces. What advice do you have for them as they begin their entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, trust your intuition, I say as a blanket thing, but also I think one thing that we've really learned is like, especially if you're looking at self-directed education as like an inspiration or trust-based approaches, um, that what that looks like as a parent versus when you create a community where you're bringing lots of people together. You, self-directed education is such an expansive experience for a parent that's supporting a kid, right? It can go in so many different directions, and so you can't do that. So understand like what kind of specific thing you're excited about, passionate about, what kind of space you can imagine seeing yourself in, even if it has like a slightly limited focus in terms of the offerings or the educational like kind of culture or content or vibe or age range or whatever. But find the thing that you feel most passionate and excited to yourself being joyful in every day, and create that and attract the people that are looking for that. And it's okay, it can't be for everyone. So I think just realizing that like having a container that is clear is going to be what allows you to really sustain it and serve the people that you do serve really well, instead of trying to serve everyone and then not serving anyone particularly well.
Oh, terrific, terrific advice, Thomas. So I'm so excited to see again the continued popularity of the ALC model and excited for your new Prism product. And hopefully that is a wonderful tool for families and founders. Thomas Parker, best wishes to you. And thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thanks, Kerry. I appreciate it. Good to see you.